Good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Report. I'm very excited about each show because we have been very fortunate to have some great guests on this program looking at topics that are very much of interest to Democrats in Oklahoma and those around the country. And tonight is no exception to that. I'm very, very fortunate to be welcoming someone who I'll tell you about in just a moment. First, though, I would like to just offer this thought. We all owe it to each other to stay healthy this season. And we all know the pandemic that we're in. So I'm going to ask that in addition to staying safe and wearing your mask and all of the things we know we're supposed to do, also please consider getting your flu shot as soon as you can to protect yourself and those that you love. Now, like I said, I have a very special guest this evening. She's someone that I have grown to admire tremendously this year as I've watched her progress as a candidate in a very, very important election. And she is running against an institution, some would say, or a dinosaur, as I might say. But I'm very happy to welcome to the Hamilton Report this evening, candidate for United States Senate from Oklahoma, Abby Broyles. Abby, welcome to the Hamilton Report.
Scott, thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
I was telling Abby just before we got started this evening that it doesn't seem to matter what time of day it is. She's always eager and ready to go, and she looks like $1 million. And those are all good qualities to have, being alert all the time as a candidate. So I want to just real quick get started by finishing off the conversation that you and I began earlier. And I said, how are you feeling? And you said you're feeling very good. I mentioned the groundswell of support that I've been seeing on social media. And you said that most all of your fundraising is coming from small donors. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, from the very beginning, we have been a campaign powered by people chipping in $5, $10, $15, whatever they can. And it's because people believe in our campaign and what we're doing and trying to take back our voice in the United States Senate. This past fundraising quarter, we actually outraised Jim Inhofe. I'll say that again. We outraised Jim Inhofe, the guy who's held this seat since 1994. He's been in D.C., of course, for much longer than that, since 1987. We don't take people PAC money. I've been endorsed by Citizens United. We deeply care about fixing money in politics. And so our campaign has been about these small dollar donations. We have over 35,000 individual contributors, and the average contribution to our campaign is $17. And that's how we've raised over $1.8 million.
That really does show a groundswell of support. 85,000 donors, is that what you said?
35,000.
Okay, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Yes, it is. Well, I'm going to jump right in. We invited everyone actually last week on Facebook to submit some questions that they want answers to. And so we're going to do a mix of that and just a conversation between you and me. But Aaron Deal makes a very valid point. He says, in such a politically charged climate, it feels like we are going to be stuck in this cycle of us versus them on nearly every issue until something or someone is able to influence a substantial change. What in your career illustrates your ability to break a cycle like that at the local level? And how does your philosophy about what you've done in collaboration work to change that us versus them mentality in Washington?
Yeah, it's a very great question because, just look at my opponent's ads. His ads are all about us versus them and trying to divide us. We desperately need leaders who are going to work across the aisle to get things done and really just bring back this sense of bipartisanship, but also decency and treating people with respect. And we have to bring our country back together. But, that starts at the top. When you have ads where, my opponent is saying if you're progressive, if you're liberal, basically, if you disagree with Jim Inhofe on anything, he says we're not Oklahomans.
Exactly.
I'm proud to be a lifelong Oklahoman, and I think that we have more in common than we have that makes us different. I think we can always find common ground with other people. to answer the question about specific to my career, I was a journalist for 10 years. I was a news anchor, investigative reporter on Channel 4 here in Oklahoma City. And I would say that, a big part of my job, it was storytelling and telling two parts of a story. And there are often two sides to that story. But I think that, my role in being able to listen to people and show that message and show two sides of a story, I didn't necessarily, and it wasn't my job as a journalist to put forth the solutions, but I'm able to listen to both sides. And I think now that I'm in a position to go and get the work done, I have that ability to, be able to take two different opinions and find common ground and bring people together. I covered so many tragedies in our state. For example, tornadoes, where people come from so many different walks of life. But when a tragedy strikes in Oklahoma, we all come together and we step up for our neighbors, because that's just what we do in our state, no matter what your political party is. And I look forward to carrying that strong Oklahoma value to Washington and the Senate.
I'm very glad to hear you say that. One of the things that we have, a number of people have asked, and I think that there truly is that yearning to return to decency, as you said a moment ago. And a number of people have asked, what steps will you take to reach across the aisle? Because certainly we know that your opponent is not good at reaching across the aisle. How would you do things differently in working with your colleagues in the Senate who are Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, right now we have a senator who just toes the party line. Everyone knows how Jim Inhofe is going to vote. And quite frankly, that makes that seat powerful, because if you don't know how someone, or if you always know how someone is going to vote, no one's going to bring you into a conversation to try to persuade you to get on board with whatever they're trying to push through. So I will be committed to having a seat at the table. Hopefully we're able to flip the Senate and I'll be in the majority in the Senate. And we need to have a voice, because if we reelect Jim Inhofe and we flip the Senate, Oklahoma doesn't have a voice in the majority. And I don't know if people think about that and how important that is, because we need to have someone on both sides. I'll be happy to work with Senator Lankford and find common ground. Things like supporting small business owners. I think that there are plenty of things that we can find common ground on to make sure that we can get work done for Oklahoma. And I just don't have it in me to be, super callous and sit in my partisan corner. That's just not who I am. I'm all about finding solutions. And as an attorney, I mean, I get into arguments with opposing counsel all the time in different cases that I have. But at the end of the day, I am very good at compromising, common ground, and moving forward. And we need leaders to move us forward and get out of this mess that we're in right now.
And leadership is critical. There's no question about that. And one of the things that we have not seen these last 4 years is true leadership. We've seen a lot of rhetoric, but it's if we don't have effective leadership, and that means in the House, the Senate, and certainly the White House, I'm very much afraid for what the future holds. So what you're saying is really refreshing. I'm going to move now to a question that was asked by a couple of people. And one is this is from Miguel Medrano, who actually is an Oklahoman, but is now working in Arizona. So I'm happy that he asked this question and is tuning in this evening. He says, with a strong and growing Latinx community living in Oklahoma, what has your campaign done to reach out to the Latinx community in a real and authentic way?
I have been in the community, and that is such a great question and a very important group of voters that we are depending on November 3rd. And, I have been holding events, talking with business owners, for example, in the Hispanic community, because they face so many hurdles when it comes to things that are a little bit easier for people who aren't in the Hispanic community, like getting access to capital, starting that small business, getting access to PPP funding. I'm doing a couple of different events later on this week up in Tulsa with the Hispanic community, and some amazing women who are getting a great group of people together. But I really think that no matter what communities we're talking about, leaders need to show up. They need to step foot in that community, listen to people, and listen to what issues matter most to them. We need leaders who aren't talking at us, but people who are actually going into the community, sitting down, asking questions, and then going and getting the job done. So if you want to go to my Facebook page, by the way, we have all those events posted. I have about 3 different ones with the Latinx community just this week. So please be sure to go there if you want to send some folks our way to join us.
I want to actually, you've already answered this. And Aislinn Burrows asked, would you make yourself available and respond to constituents when they contact your office, whether or not you agree with policy decisions or not? And I think you answered that very well, that leaders have to show up. They have to be present. And I'm grateful that's already a strong part of your plan. I'm going to take one step back, and this is kind of a piggyback question on the last one you answered. This is from Virgil Green, and he's asking, what are your plans to build the broken bridges between minority communities, specifically here, the African-American community? As we know that so much damage has occurred in the state of Oklahoma. We have a horrible history in terms of race relations with Black Americans. And what plans do you have to stop the cycle of further marginalizing minorities?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And thank you for that, Virgil. I know Virgil from my days as a reporter, so it's good to hear from him. First and foremost, I will say Black Lives Matter. My opponent does not. He doesn't understand and he doesn't care about what is happening right now. We are finally having important, long overdue conversations about racial injustice in this country. And we need leaders who are going to call it out when we see it and do something about it. I'm going to be in North Tulsa, just like I have been several times before during this campaign. I'll be up in North Tulsa on the 24th, doing a full day of action where I'm walking through the neighborhood and talking with people and talking about the important issues, talking about racial disparities when it comes to not just police reform, but also the racial disparities in healthcare and housing and education. Right now, we have a system that is broken and it is systemic, and we finally have to step up and do something about it. You know, last week I spent quite a bit of time with Pastor Scobie in Northeast Oklahoma City. I have handed out food at Ebenezer and handed out backpacks. And we kind of toured Northeast Oklahoma City, went to a few small businesses. I talked to them about, you know, the impact of COVID on their small businesses. And again, it kind of goes back to, if we want leaders who are going to fix things, they need to step foot in the community and be a part of it. And I'm doing my very best in my pack schedule to make sure that I'm doing that in all parts of our state. But I will say this too, also about Tulsa. You know, I grew up going to an Oklahoma public school, and we did not learn about the Tulsa race massacre in school. And, you know, I have spoken at Vernon AME Church. I was honored to speak there and toured the church. And, you know, that church is incredible and resilient. And its history, while they have been through so much, the worst race massacre in our country's history, the spirit and the energy you feel when you step in that building and you talk to the people who are members of that congregation, you know that that is a light in North Tulsa, and they bring so much to the community and hope. And so, you know, I really feel like we have to be telling these stories, telling the story of a church that's been around for 115 years, that stayed strong through this horrible time. And we need to start talking about what we're going to do to fix the problems of today. What are we going to do to, you know, put a healthcare facility in North Tulsa? What are we going to do to make sure that we don't just have one grocery store? Thank goodness it's happening in Northeast Oklahoma City, but maybe adding another one, getting rid of the Dollar Generals that don't do anything for our families and, you know, encourage these awful health outcomes that we have. We need leaders who are going to start making real change, and change that starts today.
It's clear to me that you're talking about an overall plan. You're talking about systemic change. And I just want to say that I think that most people aren't aware of this. You mentioned having had the honor of speaking in that church. I know from personal experience that you have been joining Black church services during the pandemic via Facebook, because most churches are not meeting in person. And the thing that impressed me the most was that you didn't make yourself known. You weren't in it for a photo op, and you didn't even ask to speak. You were just there to learn, and I respect that so much. I'm gonna continue in the vein of marginalized communities. Kathy Cott says, "What are your plans to help protect the LGBTQ plus Oklahomans federally, since the state of Oklahoma abuses their humanity? I can say our humanity, my humanity, at every turn." There's obviously a great swell of uncertainty with regard to same-gender marriage. It looks more and more likely that that's something that will go before the Supreme Court again, very likely to be undone. What can you do as a senator to protect the rights of LGBTQIA plus folks, not just in Oklahoma, but throughout the country? Abby, what do you see as an opportunity there?
Well, first and foremost, I am an ally of the community, and I will be an outspoken advocate. I will work to end discrimination in the workplace for members of the LGBTQ plus community. Right now we don't have laws on the books in Oklahoma that protects them. We hear from Oklahomans often. I've heard personal stories where this has happened. We need someone to stand up and do what's right. We need to pass that legislation. If a bill to ban conversion therapy crosses my desk, I will be happy to vote for it. I think that there are so many things that we need to do to make sure that everyone has the same rights, equality. That includes healthcare, cutting through the hurdles that so many couples have when it comes to getting access to healthcare, to insurance issues. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But we have to have senators, and you will have one in me, who stands up for equality for everyone. And I will be the exact opposite of my opponent, who has infamously said, which makes me so angry to even say it out loud, but has said he is proud on the Senate floor that he has no members in his family who are homosexual. He's also bragged about the fact that he's so happy that no one on his staff is homosexual. That is absolutely what we do not need in a U.S. senator. That is someone who is working against our fellow Oklahomans. That should be reason enough to vote him out. But I promise that I will work hard to make sure that we are ending work discrimination, and that we are doing our very, very best each and every day to provide equality for all. And everything going on with the Supreme Court, I know, has a lot of people worried. But I do think that if we flip the Senate and we have leaders who agree with me on this issue, that we can fight through this together.
Him being so proud that he has no LGBTQ members of his family just shows how out of touch he is. That's statistically impossible. So good for you on that. I appreciate that because that's a very important thing to me, to my husband, to our family, and to the community. We have a question from Victor Gorin, and he says, "What is Abby? What is your support for organized labor? And do you support organized labor? Because we know that there again in Oklahoma, that's been an uphill battle."
Of course, I support organized labor. I have been so fortunate to have the support of so many labor unions across our state from the very beginning. Honestly, that's kind of how we started building our coalition of support. Was I started talking to different locals, and people were so excited about a potential senator who wanted to go to work for working families. I was endorsed by the AFL-CIO months before my primary. I mean, it was just amazing to have so much support. And I have talked to each one of them about their issues, especially when it comes to different issues with pension programs and a different legislation that they've asked me if I would support. I've talked even during a pandemic, I've talked in more local halls than I can name over the past few months, because I mean, right now we have a senator who is only looking out for one person himself. He is certainly not looking out for working families. And I want to make sure that we're protecting workers' rights. That, I know that Oklahoma is a right to work state, and it makes it really tough, but we can have an advocate in the U.S. Senate to make sure that we are advocating for our working people and protecting their important pension programs and everything that comes with that. But they're the backbone of our economy.
This is a very big question here. David Haygood posed this question, and I know it's really difficult because until you're actually there and in the midst of it, it's hard to answer this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And that is, what do you see as your plan for the first 100 days of you being a senator?
We have got to tackle the challenges of this pandemic that have just been ignored. And it's been a disaster, let's be honest. That has been a complete disaster from the very beginning, how COVID-19 has been handled from Washington, D.C. So we need to get a handle on our public schools, making sure that every child in the state of Oklahoma has access to a laptop, a tablet, so that they're able to get an education while they are at home having to learn, because we didn't address this issue at the beginning, and schools, so many of them are back to virtual learning. We need to expand rural broadband so that our kids in rural Oklahoma are able to have access to the internet to go to school. We need to tackle healthcare. Right now, the Affordable Care Act is under siege, and we have to do everything possible to make sure we are protecting Oklahomans' healthcare. 200,000 Oklahomans were looking forward to finally having access to health insurance because we passed Medicaid expansion, and now it's under attack because the Republicans are pushing through the Supreme Court nominee, putting our healthcare at risk. The other big issue dealing with the pandemic directly is with our small business owners. We need to make sure that we are providing another round of PPP funding. I've talked to so many small business owners who are still barely making ends meet. Too many have had to close their doors through this pandemic. We need to make sure that we are addressing the needs, finally, that people have, taking care of people during this pandemic instead of mocking it, calling it a hoax, not wearing a mask, and staying in Washington, D.C. in their bubble. We need to get the work done because Oklahomans are hurting.
You are absolutely right about that. Oklahoma consistently ranks at the very bottom of the country in things like healthcare and education. And those things are not standalone issues. There are so many things that are wrapped in together. You mentioned rural broadband a moment ago. We're at a point in our society today where having internet access, good quality internet access, is not an option. Every American should have good access to good wireless. So I'm really encouraged to hear you say that. One of the things that is of concern here in Oklahoma, and Lord, we have seen it in spades during the pandemic, and that is food insecurity. Right now, you have passed out food boxes. You know what it's like. People who this time a year ago were contributing to food banks, and now are embarrassed because they're using them. And I'm certain that's nothing to be ashamed of, because we all need to eat. And yet, you mentioned Northeast Oklahoma City, for example, as having been a food desert forever. And now there's movement to get a store in. It's taken a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people. And so we did have a question posed to us. I'll come up with her name in a moment. I'm sorry, I don't have it right here. But that is, what can we do about food insecurity right here in Oklahoma? How can the federal government help?
Yeah, well, and this is probably a good time to remind folks that, my opponent voted against the COVID-19 relief bill that extended SNAP benefits. We need to make sure that we are taking care of our families. We need to make sure that even during these times when schools are shut down, that kids still have access to that free breakfast, lunch, or free breakfast and free lunch provided through our school systems. Oftentimes that is the only meal that those kids are going to get to eat. We need to make sure sure that our food banks are stocked and that we are providing adequate resources to these great local places like the regional food bank to make sure that they have enough food for people. This would be a great opportunity for us to talk about the unemployment benefits, extending the federal unemployment so that people can put food on the table. My opponent doesn't think they're worth $600 a week. I've talked to so many people. I stood in the unemployment lines listening to people who are out of work. And I mean, that they are barely making ends meet, keeping the lights on, putting food on the table. We need another round of stimulus. That would help with the food insecurity issue. But the bottom line is we need leaders who actually care about low income and middle income families. And right now we have someone who only cares about himself and his wealthy buddies in DC.
Very, very well stated, because you're talking about how difficult it is to put food on the table. I read just this weekend that the average Oklahoman, if the average Oklahoma family were to receive an unexpected bill in the mail for $400, they could not pay it today. And that's frightening. And I know what it's like. When you own a home, you've always got to be doing something to keep it up. Same with a vehicle. And the older the vehicle, the more it costs to keep it running. And so it becomes a cycle for people. And speaking of cycles, Linda Goodall raises a very good point. We have seen during this pandemic a tremendous growth here in Oklahoma City of what appears to be homeless folk. More and more in neighborhoods, street corners, parks. And Linda's asking, what do you see as one solution toward dealing with the homeless issue? And the second part of that, and we'll come back to addiction in a moment, but she says, so many of our homeless are not substance abusers. So how can we begin to make lasting positive change for these folks who simply can't find a place to live, can't afford a place to live?
Yeah. It goes back to, the root of the problem a couple of different ways. We need to make sure that we have good quality jobs. Right now, people who are out of work lost their jobs in industries that just aren't coming back. We need to make sure that, again, we're extending the unemployment benefit so that people aren't evicted from their homes. We need to make sure that we are taking care of our working families. We need to also be addressing the underlying mental health issues that are often the problem for why people are homeless. We do not talk enough about mental health because of the stigma behind it. But if we treated mental health properly, then we would not have this issue. Right now, taking care of our homeless population, that is not the top of the list, unfortunately, for very many people in elected office. But it is something that we need to address. And who we are as Oklahomans, we take care of people, and we need to make sure that we are providing, the right resources to places like our city rescue mission, making sure that they are able to expand and have enough beds to help people. And we have programs that help people get back on their feet. Make sure that we have programs that help people find jobs. Right now we are dealing with still at the beginning phases of the pandemic. And as more people are out of work and continue to stay out of work for extended periods of time, we need to be thinking about what those programs look like, how to fund them, to make sure that we are not adding to our homeless population, that we are driving it down, and making sure that we are getting people into homes and providing adequate, affordable housing for them to get into.
Abby, it is so incredibly refreshing to hear you talk about making plans, because Lord, that's something that we don't do. We were talking a moment ago about food insecurity. This administration halted the delivery of 30 million boxes of food because the president wanted his name on a letter that was included in each box. Those boxes were simply destroyed, and how many people went hungry? So you are talking about real plans that need to be made, that will begin to put the pieces together. You already mentioned healthcare, and that's clearly a major issue in Oklahoma. And on top of the pandemic, we're seeing more and more substance abuse issues presenting. Talk a little bit about what you see as some steps toward a solution in terms of drug and alcohol treatment.
Yeah, I mean, again, we need to finally talk about substance abuse and mental health treatment and not be afraid to talk about it. We need to be funding programs. We need to make sure that insurance policies actually cover mental health. Look at even just the marketplace right now. There are so many policies out there where there is no coverage for mental health. And if people aren't getting the treatment they need, then that is a huge problem. They aren't taking the medications they need to stay healthy. We need to make sure that we are taking healthcare and fixing it first, but then also looking at the treatment centers that are available and what can we do to improve them? How can we improve access to them? This all goes back to access to healthcare. And if people don't even have health insurance, they don't have their foot in the door to be getting help. So until we create a healthcare system where no matter what, you can get a plan, we are not going to solve this problem. And that's why we must have advocates for healthcare in the U.S. Senate.
Well, I couldn't agree more because that's an issue that we continue to struggle with in Oklahoma. I was reading again this weekend something that really saddened me, and it was talking about the massive increase in number of suicides among men over 35. And it's because they, in many cases, just feel like they had no one to talk to and no place to turn. So I'm really grateful that that's an area that you are looking at with a sense of seriousness and a sense of urgency. Donna Compton asked a question that I would really be interested to hear the answer to. What motivated you to run for Senate? Why now, and why this office, Abby?
Yeah, well, that's a question I get a lot. And, I never imagined running for office growing up in Oklahoma. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a journalist from as young as I can remember. And so I did that. I wanted to speak up for people who needed a voice. I wanted to tell people's stories. And I did that for a decade. It's the reason why I went back to law school as well. I wanted to speak up for people, advocate for Oklahomans. I wanted to be able to do that in a courtroom. So put myself through law school. I actually did not imagine running for office. And it was Jim Inhofe who convinced me to run for office himself. We've been covering a story for a couple of years at Channel 4 about military families who are dealing with mold and asbestos on base housing. The conditions were terrible. I remember watching kids take toys from their homes to RVs across the street because they could no longer live at their homes on Tinker Air Force Base because the conditions were so bad. These families have been calling and emailing Senator Inhofe's office for months and got no response. So that's why they called the news stations. They called up Channel 4 and we started telling their stories, as did several other media outlets. And it was just about a year ago that Senator Inhofe finally came down to Midwest City, held a press conference at Tinker Air Force Base, and I watched him tell these families how nice their housing was. He said, if the housing was this nice when I was in the Army, I would have stayed longer. And it made me so angry to hear him talk to military families like that. Here he is out of touch with everyday Oklahomans, but he touts his chairmanship on armed services, yet he can, offend military families like that. It was a short time later that I got off the sidelines. And like so many people, I have watched Washington, D.C. become even more broken, a place where career politicians go to look out for themselves, get rich off what should be public service, instead of representing us. I've been listening to Oklahomans for a decade and telling their stories, and now I'm ready to go and work for them. And I promise in me, you will have someone who will get up each and every day, go to work for you, be back here holding town halls, being accessible, and actually getting work done. I am tired of being at the bottom of so many lists, especially when it comes to public education and healthcare. As a lifelong Oklahoman, I deeply care about the future of our state. So I did something a little uncomfortable, got out of my comfort zone, got in this race, and I couldn't be happier that I did, because we have a real opportunity right now, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to flip this seat.
I couldn't be happier as well that you're running for this position. We have talked in previous episodes of the Hamilton Report about policing, community policing, criminal justice reform. And we had several questions. Lynn Green asked, how do you define justice, and how do you see expanding justice for all people?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, we have a broken criminal justice system. I'm a lawyer, and the rule of law is what our country has to stand on. We need to make sure that everyone has equality under the law. And it starts with police reform. And, I know that my opponent is trying to, pit families against each other with his ads saying you're either for the police or you're everybody else. I'm supportive of law enforcement, but this is a sector where we cannot have a few bad apples. Just like American Airlines can't have a few bad pilots, our police departments cannot have a few racist police officers. It is time to end these policies that we know are racially charged. We have, for too long, let the criminal justice system go unchecked. And instead of, we say we're being tough on crime. We need to be smart on crime. That looks like things like the people of Oklahoma wanted. We passed 780 and 781. Now we need to, pass State Question 805. We need to make sure that everybody is treated the same under the law, whether that also includes how they're prosecuted, but looking at people who are already incarcerated. I, on the federal level, support decriminalizing marijuana. One of the reasons is because our federal law is so antiquated, when right now marijuana in Oklahoma, look at the two conflicts in laws. We need to make sure that people are not over sentenced. And this doesn't mean that, we are putting dangerous people on the streets. We're talking about low level drug offenders. And we have to have leaders who are going to have the courage to stand up and do what's right. And that is implementing long lasting criminal justice reform and an avenue for people to enter back into society, get good quality jobs, to be able to contribute to our society again once they get out of serving their sentence.
Or looking at pieces of I can't help but be struck by looking at how you are exploring pieces of a whole. You're not, the way that you're answering these questions, it's clear to me that you don't see any one of these things in a vacuum, but rather as a part of something much bigger. One of the questions that we've had by a number of people, and this is a tough question here in Oklahoma. We've also gotten a number of calls at the Oklahoma Democratic Party headquarters. People are concerned about where we are with energy. Those people who have energy sector jobs now in the oil and gas industry are deathly afraid of losing their high-paying jobs, and that those jobs will be replaced, with a different kind of approach to energy at a much lower rate, making them obsolete. So it's a tough question. How do we continue to support our Oklahoma families who do make their living in the oil and gas business, while at the same time moving Oklahoma to a place where we are smarter about alternative fuels? If you would speak a little bit about that, and I know that that's a tough question because it's a tough balance.
Yeah. And I'm supportive of the oil and gas industry. I know my opponent runs attack ads saying I want to destroy the oil and gas industry. This is Oklahoma. Of course, I don't want to do that. That is a fifth of our economy. I have dear friends who work in the industry. I have friends who have lost their jobs in oil and gas this year. It's a tough time. But we are a great oil and gas state. We can also become the energy state. That looks like, diversifying. It's, expanding and adding jobs in wind and solar. There's no reason why we should be behind Texas when it comes to wind energy. This is Oklahoma. We also need to be making sure that we are just thinking about our future in general. And I have talked to so many people who work in the oil and gas industry who tell me, making money is great. If we don't have clean air and clean water and a planet to live on, then why make all this money in the first place if we can't enjoy it? And so there are people in the industry who understand it's not one or the other. We can work to fight the adverse effects of climate change while also supporting the oil and gas industry, but also making sure that we are engaging in practices that are not going to harm our environment.
I think it's a very good point that it doesn't matter if you make a lot of money if the planet is not going to be here to support your children and grandchildren. So I do recognize that that's not an easy answer, and it's something that I think that Congress is going to have to be very intentional about. Certainly the White House is, because we don't have much time to fix to turn things around from the mess that we have created in our world. So I appreciate what you're saying there. We've covered a lot of ground this evening, and gosh, it's clear to me that your interests are many and varied. But I'd like for you to tell us, what Senate committees are you most interested in serving on?
I would say, ag, farming, agriculture is still our biggest industry, and I want to make sure that we are uplifting our family farmers. They have been devastated by this trade war and the tariffs. We need to be uplifting our farmers. So I think that that's definitely a committee I'd like to be on. When it comes to energy, I think being from Oklahoma, we need to have a presence on there. And how great would it be to have a Democrat from Oklahoma talking about energy policy? Also, Indian affairs. The McGirt decision is going to have to be addressed soon. The effects of the McGirt Supreme Court decision. And, my opponent has been working against the tribes for so long. I support the tribes. I respect their sovereignty. I had some great meetings just over the weekend up in Northeast Oklahoma with members of the Intertribal Council up there, and talking about ways that, we can work government to government, ways in which, we are not allowing the state to regulate their environment on tribal land for one matter, in one instance. And I think that, what has happened, all the fear mongering after the McGirt decision came down, we need to just make sure that people understand that particular ruling was a narrow ruling, but we also need to make sure that our federal delegation takes the appropriate steps going forward so that we are working together on this criminal matters and then the other litigation that is bound to happen over the next several years. So being on Indian affairs, those are key for me. Also, I want to be a part of every healthcare conversation there is. I cannot stress enough how many Oklahomans tell me they would love to have access to healthcare. They simply can't afford it. We need to make sure that now that we pass Medicaid expansion and the ACA is in limbo, we have to make sure a leader from Oklahoma has a seat at the table making our healthcare decisions, because it is our future. And for so many Oklahomans, it's a pocketbook issue. And we need to have a leader who is in the game and not my opponent who's sitting on the sidelines, not even part of the conversation.
It's hard to be a part of the conversation when you don't even show up to vote, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
We're going to switch to another sector entirely. It's one that we have not heard much about this year, and unfortunately, these are some of the folks who have been hit hardest of all, and that is the arts. The arts and artists of every stripe have really taken a major hit, with theaters closed, movie production, television shows not beginning production as they normally would. And Jonathan Beck Reed, who is a founding member of City Rep here in Oklahoma City, asked this question: would you support federal programs to enhance funding of the arts and protect the National Endowment for the Arts?
Yes, 100% yes. And also, we have to do everything possible right now during this pandemic, making sure that we are providing relief to those theaters and making sure that they are part of receiving those funds, so that when we are able to be back together socially, that they can open their doors and be successful and thrive once again. I am such a huge fan of the arts. I grew up playing music. I played the piano. I was in choir. My whole family plays musical instruments. My grandmother was a piano teacher. I grew up going to musicals and you name it with my mom. And so I personally am a huge supporter of the arts. And this is certainly something that we cannot keep stripping away from our schools, by the way. We need kids kids who are getting engaged at a very early age. I learned so much being a musician and making sure that our kids have those same opportunities that we had. I want every child to have the same opportunities going to an Oklahoma public school, and arts is a critical piece of that.
I'm delighted that you said that. My first experience with the symphony orchestra was when I was in public school. The same could be said for a professional theater production, the first ballet. And so that is very important. And I'm really happy to hear that you are interested in continuing support and expanding support. With the current administration continuing to threaten funding for public television and public radio, that does not speak well for us as a country in terms of our culture that simply has to be nurtured, in my opinion. And I'm glad to hear you say the same thing. Abby, I know that your time is really tight tonight and you've kind of pushed some things around. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and I think that this is wonderful. This comes from Jody Harlan. She says, what advice does Abby have for young girls about achieving their dreams?
I'll say that I'm sitting in my campaign office right now, and on my wall I have letters from little girls and their moms who they've been writing me for months, saying that they are watching and their daughters are inspired by what we're doing, what our campaign is doing and talking about. We have never had a woman senator representing Oklahoma in the United States Senate, and we have the opportunity to do that this year. And I love getting those pictures of parents taking their daughters to the polls to vote for them like they did back in June. And I know that they're going to do that in November too, because they want girls to see that they too can grow up to be a U.S. senator. This is no longer the good old boys crowd. We're sending an Oklahoma woman to go get the job done. And I hope that every little girl watching this election cycle, I know that they are exposed to the awful things that come out of this administration and the vitriol and the hatred towards women. I hope they're looking at the powerful women who are standing up and running for office, because we have an important voice and deserve a seat at the table. I think that this is the perfect opportunity for every little girl to look at and say, Abby's just like me. I'm just like Abby. I grew up in Bethany, Oklahoma, in a middle-class family. The goal was to go to college and get a job and, just have this traditional, American life like everybody wants. I never imagined running for the U.S. Senate. And if I can do it, then every little girl watching us this election cycle can do it too.
That is a perfect way to end our time together this evening, because you inspire me. I know that you inspire so many people around the state of Oklahoma who are ready for positive change, true representation in Washington. And Abby, in these last few days of the campaign, know that you've got a lot of friends who are pushing for you, working for you, and wishing you all the best. And it's my sincere hope that the next time I see you, I can greet you as Senator Broyles. Abby, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone watching. Please get your friends out to vote. It's going to take every single one of us to get this done on November 3rd.
Wow, that's incredibly encouraging. As much as I have liked Abby and what she's had to say along the campaign trail, I feel like even now I have a better understanding of who she is as a person and who she will be as a senator for all of us here in Oklahoma. I really do appreciate her time this evening, and certainly I appreciate your time as well. Before we end our time together, though, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. The Oklahoma Democratic Party needs your support. You see, we work every day to promote, to help, and to enable candidates up and down the ballot. And that doesn't mean just during a presidential election cycle. It means every year in and out. Soon the election will be behind us, and we know that it's very difficult to raise money for those months following the election. And so I'm asking you now to please consider making a gift. It doesn't matter what amount, anything that you're comfortable with. Just know that every nickel that we take in, we put to work to make Oklahoma a better place to live for us and for generations to come. I'm delighted that you were with us this evening for this expanded broadcast. We'll be back again next Monday evening at 7. I hope that you will find reason to share this program with your friends on your social media so that they too might understand a little better who Abby Broyles is and the amazing senator that I believe she will make for Oklahoma. So until next week, please take good care of yourselves, get your flu shots, and know that I care what you have to think and say about everything that goes on. So we love hearing from you. Take good care. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Good night.